The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, hello everybody. My name is Jeff Stone, Merit Solutions. Josh, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good to go.
All right, very good. Well, thank you everybody for joining our webinar, your Dynamics 365 upgrade, understanding the why and how. Today we will go over both, as it says, why should you be looking into D365 today as an upgrade versus waiting, and then we'll talk more about the steps involved, so the technical, non-technical, and some other considerations as well. I'll just start real quick introduction. Again, my name is Jeff Stone. I've been with Merit about 5 years. I lead the U.S. Services Group, our consultants, support team, our Azure services engineers. I've personally been working with ERP systems for about 18 years, going back to Oracle, GP, and then AX and D365. I do have a development background, but I would not call myself a developer any longer. And as I'm talking through some of the technical steps here, if I get in too deep, I'll pause, and we can always take something offline, pull in another resource if needed. But I think we have some good content to share on the technical side, as well as the functional and kind of planning pieces of this puzzle with an upgrade. Go quickly into 1 minute just about Merit Solutions. Again, I've been with Merit 5 years. We've been around doing Dynamics work though for about 17, starting with GP and then shifting over towards AX. We're Gold Partner, ERP and Cloud Services, headquartered in Chicago. We actually have our largest offices in Europe though, so we support global implementations. We will be at the AXUG Summit in a couple weeks, so if there's anything further to discuss you hear about today, you can definitely stop by our booth. We'd love to have you there. I'll personally be there with a few of our other sales and services team members. Merit, we focus a lot on the manufacturing and life sciences, so most of our clients are in those areas, but we do have clients in other industries as well. And so we do have some IP around life sciences called Max Life that extends the quality and compliance aspects of the system. Just a couple other things. We have a US-based support team that provides the ongoing services that we'll talk about here that you may learn a little bit about some of the other things you have to consider going forward versus the traditional on-premise AX environment. So a little bit of a backdrop about Merit. And you can see we were honored to be a partner of the year for Microsoft this year. Okay, so this is the slide you can probably use and hand over to your CIO or VP if you need to, one slide to set the tone for why you need to be upgrading now. There's a full article in the last AXUG magazine that we produced that expands on each of these, and many of them will be topics of what I discussed today. But in a nutshell, there's a couple key reasons why now would be the time to move to D365. I personally had trouble convincing clients to upgrade from AX 2009 to 2012. I, at the time was struggling to relay the benefits and let them know what was so much better about 2012. So I'm guessing, without seeing a show of hands, that maybe half of you on this call are still on 2009, and that may have been the right decision looking back in time. I can say it's a completely different story now with the D365 platform, and that there's so much more that's been added, which we'll talk about in the next slide, that this becomes a much easier sell when you're trying to tell each other why to move forward. And then you also have that bottom grid there, which is the scare tactic, I guess, of saying that the system that you're on today will not be supported forever. It's already starting to go past their mainstream support dates for 2009 and 2012 RTM, and then extended support even is has the deadline lurking. So we'll talk about each of these a little bit more, but did want to share this, and this presentation will be available if you want to grab one slide, like I said, to raise up the ladder. This might be the one. So to go into a little bit further, why am I saying that this is the right time? So basically, if you're on AX right now and you're thinking you're trying to go to the next version of AX, you need to think about it a little bit differently. D365 is more of a platform. The way that Microsoft has positioned the different pieces around what used to be AX, the finance and operations now, and the roadmap that they have to integrate all these. I won't say that it's seamless right now between the CRM sales areas and the finance and ops, but you can see the vision. It's all these different apps and these different central repositories of data, along with the applications and data services and IoT and BI intelligence that can go circle around them. That's what you're trying to move to. That's the story for your CIO, your VP of why now. Merit in particular, we've been doing Azure work for many years. We've got mobile development teams, and we've been putting AX in Azure even before it was on D365. So as soon as it was certified with all the redundancy needed, we had clients that we were putting up in Azure. We've also now invested in some of the newer modules, the talent and the field service marketing pieces. So we have people that are certified in each of those now. In general, I think a lot of the partners are trying to keep up, which is good. Microsoft is evolving. There's a lot to consider. So maybe marketing and talent aren't the two driving factors for you, but this can show, again, in that decision-making process, that it is the right time. It's the right time to move to D365, and you may be able to, phase 2, remove an old legacy HR system and move to talent, for example. There's also, we won't get into this one too far, but this is more of if you're trying to convince somebody to move to the cloud in general slide. Most of the folks that use AX 2012 or 2009 are on premise, and that's a big jump to say now we're going to go to a software as a service. So there's, this is your slide that talks about all the different costs that kind of get rolled up into the new model. And I do have a slide later on about the exact pricing. But this is really that, all those other things that you consider when you're putting in an IT system and how maybe indirectly there are those costs involved. One thing I don't really have in this presentation, but I'll talk about it here, is when you're going to make this move to D365, the finance and operations roadmap, I think it's starting in April, their plan is to automatically push out code updates. So there are two different types of updates that they'll have going forward, or that they have today. They call them platform updates and application updates. The platform updates, you can think of those as kind of like your Windows updates that you just kind of let happen every month. And then the application updates are what they sound like, almost the cumulative type of rollouts. So Microsoft's strategy now going forward is that both of those are going to be merged into monthly updates that are going to be, pretty much automatic, and you'll have to opt out of it and do some testing ahead of time. So it truly will be a software as a service. There's still the ability to customize and integrate, which we'll talk about, but that vision, if any of you are already on the CRM product, for example, or even just think of Office 365 and SharePoint, there's updates that get pushed out, and that's their vision with their ERP system as well. So I know being in life sciences, for us, that's a discussion topic, at least with some clients that have to validate their system, and we have to talk through how we're going to do the testing necessary. But the positive spin on that is that you're always on the latest release of code. You don't have to worry about another upgrade like we're talking about right now to get there going forward. Okay, I have just a couple more kind of Azure general topics to discuss. Again, moving to the cloud, this is a Microsoft slide, all their different data centers, which, okay, great, they have 100 data centers. The reason I'm putting it in here, though, is that one of the first things you'll have to do in making a move up to D365 is to determine where you want your data to live. Even though it's all in the cloud, there is still a primary data center that you need to choose. So when we're working with clients that have offices in Europe and US and Asia, there's a process at the beginning, and there's tools that Microsoft provides in Azure to do some speed tests and latency tests to determine where you should really, we'll say, host your primary data center. We've had a lot of luck with the Eastern US ones because of, if we have clients that are in Europe and US or South America, it seems to be the best hit for us so far. But yeah, that is a topic you'll have to think about, and I know there's some new regulations with where data is stored that you'll have to consider as well. All right, and the kind of last couple of slides on the why now and the Azure D365 story in general. I touched on it a little bit earlier. The way you're thinking about your ERP system is going to change in the upcoming years. It's not just about putting in accounting numbers and spitting out an aging report. We have clients now that are already asking us to, well, if today we get this aging report and we are assessing it and trying to figure out which, some trends, can the system do that for us? And that's exactly what Microsoft is pushing for. So there are data models and BI tools and artificial intelligence things that are evolving every day that we're trying to at least make our clients aware of and get them thinking a little differently about how to use the data that comes out of their system. In addition, in the manufacturing space especially, there's these IoT devices you can connect in Azure. We've got our own, like I mentioned, Max Life product, where we started to integrate scales and dispensing functionality. We've got clients that use sensors for heat and temperature and humidity in their rooms where they're doing quality exams, and that information can flow right into finance and ops automatically. So again, in this Azure cloud world, there's some benefits that maybe are indirect, but definitely things to be thinking about. And then the last kind of D365, we'll say propaganda slide. This is the talent module in a single slide. Again, this is not an area that most partners have historically pushed for very hard with the Microsoft AX product, meaning the HR and some of the other expense management pieces. They've done a really good job with this module. I think it can go head to head with some of the other off-the-shelf Workdays of the world. Of the 8 or so D365 projects that we've been doing, I'd say 3 of them have said, let's start with talent and let's do project and expenses first, because we want to get a feel for the system, get as many people from the company involved using it as possible. The licenses aren't too expensive for those task type of users. And so we've actually had a nice amount of success and have enjoyed putting in some of these modules that in the past were kind of always on a phase 2 list or an afterthought. So again, the idea of having these different apps and different ways to get in to start using the system is a little different than having to spend X number of dollars to buy the ERP system up front, and may dictate how you decide to start using it. I'm not going to get too far into all the different pieces of the talent module. There's, I will say one thing that they've done is they don't necessarily do payroll in D365. Not many people did it in AX either, but they're building integrations to go to a handful of different payment processing tools, Concur and Ceridian. The open enrollment is pretty nice. There's quite a few different things that they're doing now to try and integrate the data further with financial operations user worker data as well. And just to kind of finish on this topic, there's a roadmap that Dynamics.com that if you haven't looked at that, they do a really good job, Microsoft does, of showing what's going to be in future releases. And they pretty much promise it. So if it's on that, it's going to be on right now they're semi-annual, but they'll be even more frequent going forward. And that's for both operations, sales, talent, any of the applications. Okay, so we've got the selling done. You're ready to move on to D365. Again, I didn't ask what system everybody's coming from. I'm going to do a little bit of discussion, kind of general methodology, and then we'll get into some 2009 and 2012, both of those, into the weeds a little bit of how that would work. And we'll talk a little bit more about the final testing and go live process as well. I guess the first thing I wanted to show though is that, this is a project. This is I don't want to say re-implementation, but it could be for some folks. And it's definitely not an IT, hey, go upgrade this for me. And you can see it's because there is so much new functionality that you could take advantage of, or things that you need to at least consider versus just doing things the way you always have. So Merit has developed a roadmap. We also have some assessment tools that I'll talk about at the end to help determine which path you should be going down. But yeah, the main thing is you do have to get the buy-in. This is going to be a project. You're going to have the the user community involved heavily in looking at your existing processes, existing data, and really working through how you want to move forward. It could end up being a rather technical exercise, a little bit less intensive, or it could end up being, as like I said, almost a re-implementation, and we'll talk about how you can come to that conclusion. So one of the first things that Mira likes to do, if you haven't already seen all the functionality I talked about, is make sure that you get that demo. When we're talking to a candidate about an upgrade, we'll try to put in a couple hours of, let's make sure you're understanding all the different pieces of D365, the functionality, and let's figure out what your phases really are. Maybe that HR talent stuff looks cool, but it's not a priority. Or maybe say, hey, this is a good chance for us to get rid of an old system, and let's do that as part of this. So that's one of the things we'll make sure to do from the beginning. Obviously, we'll talk about the licensing and pricing, and I have a slide in a minute to show you that. But the goal is to quickly kind of assess what you have today, what your goals are, and then to be able to put together an estimate and a plan. I said all that in about 30 seconds, but that's usually a 3 to 10 day exercise, and we have different types of assessments that we can show you later on about how we get to that point. For certain clients out there, Microsoft is offering some incentives to work with your partner, or work with any partner, work with Merit on how to do that assessment. There's some client customer incentives and software assurance benefits is what it's called, where you may be able to help get that assessment paid for or completely paid for. So if you're looking for more information on that too, I can just provide some more information at the end. I actually have a couple other folks on the line right now that can maybe help with that at the end. But do want to just say that that's the goal, is that there's a assessment that you'll need to do to determine how we want to proceed with this. So once we've done that, we have your planning in place. The real decision is, all right, we're going to go forward. We're going to do an upgrade, we'll say. We're going to, what I mean by that is we're going to keep existing functionality and data, is really as far as I want to call that right now. I showed on here that you'll have to decide if you really want to go through what we call BTM, a transformation mapping. This is which customizations that you have today are really necessary, what can be now standard functionality. So that's a big piece of moving from 2009, especially, or anything before 2012 R3, because there was so much functionality introduced in R3, where D365 is using that. If we're on 2009 or earlier 2012 version, there's a lot of new functionality to take advantage of. We'll talk through here in a second that you're going to need plans specifically around both the data and the code, and people involved to handle that. We talked a little bit about infrastructure, but security is another one. If you are, excuse me, on 2009, especially the security roles you're using, you must have invented yourself, because it didn't really come with security roles. So there's a process of trying to map out and say, okay, my existing roles will go to these new roles in D365. 2012, it's a little bit closer, because there were some models that they gave you to start with. You're going to have to think through the integrations, and this is a big one, because in D365, when you're on the cloud now, you can't just go into your database and start hitting it and writing queries. You can't set up a file watching routine on the AOS server. These are machines that are managed by Microsoft. So you have to think about your integrations and your data pulls a little differently. This was probably the trickiest part, a year ago when we were starting on these projects, was how to architect some of these things. Even the ISVs that are out there, the add-in products, I think they were struggling a little bit up front, but we've seen it getting a little bit better now. There's some common best practices around how you integrate and how you pull data out. The good news is that the BI, especially the Power BI, which I'll show in a few seconds, if you haven't seen that piece of the puzzle, Microsoft's really doing a good job to make that a strong tool for users to do their ad hoc reporting. A lot of things that we used to have to develop reports for are now possible and included. Some really good dashboards, which will, again, that's part of the demoing process, but we'll also hit on those a little bit here. Okay, let's go through a methodology here. So this is actually something I pulled from our new project planning methodologies, but it's very similar for an upgrade, right? So you're going to have to do some things with environments and setting up. If you're not using LCS today with your 2009 or 2012 environment, that's a key system requirement for D365. Everything that we do is going to be managed through Azure and LCS. So that's something we'll have to get set up, provisioned. We'll go through the different workshops, which I'll discuss in a moment, about how we are going to actually migrate the data, migrate the code, prepare the environments, have your cutover, your go live cutover planning, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. Sometimes that's overlooked, is how you're actually going to go from system A to system B, and then close out and operational things. So again, the real purpose of this slide is to show this is a project. It's not an IT task by itself. This is just showing, I mentioned Power BI, and this is actually from VSTS. So these are the types of kind of out-of-the-box tools that are available as you're going through a project now. So if we decide that we're going to implement a new module and you're going to have to configure whatever this was, 900 different things, these are the types of visual tools that are out there right now in the systems that we use, the VSTS, where we're tracking the requirements and what's needed by module, by status. And I also show this because this is how your users will be thinking about data in D365 now, because Power BI is allowing them to slice and dice and create these more dashboard-looking reports going forward. I'm going to skip through the licensing pretty quick, the dollar amounts. This is public knowledge that's out there. The key point being that there is a change in the way you think about the licenses from one time to ongoing, per user per month. There's some incentives for when you move. Again, this may be, I think this is the latest, but you definitely want to check with Microsoft. And there are some minimums as well. So D365 for operations has a 20 user minimum. So that's something, if you're a small AX implementation right now, to take into account. I've done the math for a couple of our clients that were smaller. It still made sense for them to pay for the 20 over time and hope they start using it. But if they were less, but that is a pretty hard rule from Microsoft right now. All right, so let's get into a little bit more of the actual how. I'll talk first about, I'll save the data migration for a few seconds, but talk a little bit more about the configurations, customizations first. And as I mentioned, even ISV solutions, third party. So these are all the different pieces of the puzzle you need to think about. The little street sign in the middle, this is how Merit refers to starting fresh with new implementations. You have your BTM track, where we call it transformation mapping, business transformation mapping, where you're really analyzing everything that the system can do and going down your own path. And then we also have what we call our Rapid 365, which is out of the box kind of best practices that you can start with. And this may be, again, if you're deciding that your system is so far from what you really want it to be, Merit at least offers a tool that includes, I think we're up to over 200 business processes right now with a best practice. So if you've been using AX pretty vanilla, and you think it might even be better if you have old data and old processes, and you want to take this opportunity to move towards best practices, we have this tool that we could use, and where we end up doing more of a data migration and have the data fall into line with best practice processes. There's some utilities out there in the LCS and Azure environment, these task guides, so built-in training documentation. These are implementations we've done for clients that have never seen AX before, so it doesn't have to be a move from AX. It could be any legacy system, but it's been a shortcut approach. And you can see, basically, we're trying to get you up and going about half the time, maybe a few months instead of a 9-month project. And we do that because we're kind of saying, not everybody, many clients do AP and AR the same way. So if you're just looking for a best practice on those, don't necessarily worry about what you had in your old system. Let's just go forward, use the rapid model, and we can start from there. The rest of this presentation, though, is going to assume that you've already are down the path of the ERP My Way. You've got a system that truly is unique and customized, and you want to keep it that way. So we'll talk now about the upgrade path of the data and code both. All right, so the upgrade path, kind of technically, from either of these versions is going to depend heavily on which version you're on. So there are different tools, different methods available of how we're going to do specifically the data upgrade based on the version you're on. The database size, I put that on here, that doesn't matter as much, but what I was really getting at is if you have old crappy data that you don't want, then this is an opportunity to do something differently. So and I'll get into these more, but with 2009, you're going to, in essence, choose the data you want to push over, to say it at the highest level, and I'll talk about how we do that. With 2012, you're going to basically take your database and upload it and use that as a starting point. So even the cleaning up, the pre-upgrade steps that you'll do to clean up are going to be a little bit different. In 2009, you can write rules to say, I don't want to bring over any vendor that hasn't been used in the last 2 years or whatever it is. With 2012, you would actually have to do something to remove those records from the database once you have that copy of the database that you want to use as your starting point for the upgrade. So it's same end result as you're trying to bring over what you really want, but the method of how you'll do it will differ, for example. So we'll go into the data migration tool. That's probably the one I'll get into the deepest in a few moments. Volume of customizations. Yeah, this kind of gets back into do you even want to bring over certain customizations, or do you want to see what the system will do out of the box, almost start fresh and see if you even need to customize, try to minimize some of that. Either way, you're going to have to rewrite these customizations because the model has changed. In AX 2009 and 2012, the concept of layers is what you're using when you're writing code. In D365, they're using something called extensions, which we'll talk about a little bit. The key there is that with the current version and new versions of D365, that's going to be a requirement. It's going to be mandatory. They grandfathered the layering concept for the last year or so. So we do have clients where we got them up and going, still using the layering style of coding, but now we're working with them to really almost do another little mini upgrade of their code because it's not longer going to be supported starting in the spring, I believe. We talked about infrastructure and security a little bit. Again, the cloud jump can be huge for some companies. I know when we first were starting to work with some 2012 clients in Azure, that was probably the biggest struggle we had. It wasn't necessarily anything to do with AX. It was the integrations with Active Directory and files and FTP. I think that's where over the last few years it's become much more standardized. The best practices are there from Microsoft now. Especially with Office, it's all integrated. All your licensing is going to be named users, just like if you set up an Office 365 account. A couple other things to consider. I mean, in Azure, you'll have your few environments that you get, but if you have a need for additional environments, which every client we have has needed additional environments, those are basically you pay as you use them. So they're literally per minute. So we've done things to script our clients' environments to have nightly shutdowns and restarts in the morning, or just keep them off entirely unless they're needed for a QA environment, a code migration. So that's just something you'll need to take into account, is that even though you get the sandbox, test, and production environments for your all-in-one licensing price, you probably are still going to need to have some additional environments. And then for licensing, the 2012, it's not as big of a deal, but with 2009, if you're in a concurrent model, going over to named, you'll have to think about that formula of how you move from X number of concurrent users to a named model. Okay. I've mentioned this a little bit already. This is another Power BI dashboard slide and executive metrics. And there are, at last I checked, over 100 workspaces that come with D365. They're the equivalent of the 2012 role groups or role centers, which, to be honest, most of the Merit clients, at least that I've worked with, were not using extensively. But basically because they were built on SharePoint and they were not very flexible. I'll say that Microsoft has done a good job where our clients now are asking about these workspaces up front. So that's a different way of thinking about it. I talked a little bit about the integrations. You can't touch the systems directly, so we have to set up Azure hubs, for example, a separate machine just to be that broker to receive files from a bank or whatever it is and interact. Same with EDI and e-banking. So most of the ISVs now have some type of Azure file hub, they call it, which is a separate server outside of your D365 environment. So there will be minimal cost for one of those servers typically in an implementation. I talked a little bit early on about some of the other integrations in the common data model, where between what used to be CRM and AX, they're trying very hard to build that flow so you can have a quote become an order and push over from your sales CRM system over to your AX finance and ops system. It's a work in progress. I know we've had to supplement what Microsoft has, we'll say, with other creative integration tools. I'll just leave it at that. But that, again, it's the roadmap, and it's something to be thinking about and to be up to speed with the latest that's out there. Okay, I think that's kind of everything except for the code and data we talked about. So let's get into the code a little bit. So with 2009, the approach, again, for us is to revisit the functionality pretty much individually to determine whether it even should be replaced with D365 or not. I mentioned having to look at BI and other things. So 2009, I mean, it was there in 2012, but we have clients using cubes, for example, and that's no longer going to be a thing in D365. Instead, with D365, you'll have a reporting version of the database that's available that Power BI is hitting. So again, if you have clients that are doing things with the analytic cubes, that's immediately, or not if you have clients, if you are a client that's doing things with the analytic cubes, they'll need to come up with a new option to work with that data. We've had folks that have access databases that just have direct hits into the SQL. Those type of integrations you just won't be able to do any longer. So those are a couple of approaches around the code. As I mentioned, the actual X++ code will need to be rewritten using the extensions. So for most of our clients, that there is a tool that can analyze that and help you to determine which methods are even upgradable. But with our, again, it becomes a pretty manual task. That is definitely when we're estimating these projects, Merit's highest piece of the estimates is refactoring code, just rewriting it in the right models that are now supported. So the more you can get rid of, the more standard functionality you can use. We definitely encourage that. The method for 2009, though, once you've decided, yes, we're good, we're going to move our code, we're going to go forward with this, and we want to move our data as well, there's a tool called the data migration tool. And how this works, I'll show you some screenshots here. As I mentioned, basically, you're choosing which data you want to pull out of 2009 to push over. There are, again, you can use your master data configurations balances. That might just make the most sense to actually show this, but the concept is you can selectively choose which ones you want to push over using the Import-Export Framework. Yeah. So you'll export files. Those files will then, so in your 2009 environment, you'll export what you need, and I'll show you the screenshots here in a second. Takes advantage of some mappings, and then from this data migration tool, it actually will be configured to point from your 2009. This is all happening in your 2009 environment. you'll point it to an Azure environment. So as long as it's the D365 environment is set up, what will happen is this data will create a package to get pushed out and then imported into D365. So if we see it a little bit here, and some of these screenshots, I apologize, maybe a little blurry. I'll again share the slide deck with afterwards. But when you do the install of this data migration tool, you'll get a whole new module in your AS2009 environment called Data Migration. It installs this service as well that's running. It's called the Data Import-Export Framework service. And you'll start by basically, it's not quite a checklist, but you'll walk through here. You'll start with the company that you want to migrate data from. You'll move through and you'll say, okay, here are some parameters to set up. This is my, basically where I'm going to put this file that is getting created. And here is my target information. So my D365 for ops, you're going to have to set up the URL and some username and password to connect up to that environment. This will obviously be a test environment to start. You can't just write into your production directly. So the process will be, I think I may have a slide for this, is that you'll migrate up to a non-production box. You can then validate everything in D365 and then schedule that to be promoted up to your production environment when you're ready. Everything with D365 requires scheduling with Microsoft. Any code changes that you want to release, any data fixes are done through through LCS by scheduling an update to occur with Microsoft. Once you have that, once you've chosen your company, you configure these parameters, the system will identify the list of the source tables and it will automatically recognize many of the mappings of source to target. So again, it's tricky to see without doing it in real time. But in this example, we're looking through customer information. We are choosing a entity, so you can get very granular. You can say, I'm going to choose, actually this was an inventory one. And the idea is you can say which columns you'd like to pick. Like I mentioned, there's some other rules you can put in where you can say I only want this if it was created in the last 2 years, so you can selectively pick which data to pull over. The other good thing about this is you can run it incrementally. So if you're doing this, you say I want the last 2 years of the data and you pull it all over. 2 weeks later, you can run it again and say show me just the last 2 weeks of data, and you can create a new package that can get appended into the target environment. So we used this approach ourselves when we were upgrading our own, CRM, not so much 2009 because we were already on 2012, but we used that incremental approach for other upgrades, which worked really well to be able to extend the time a little bit that you're working on it and then only focus on a small amount of data near the end. Other things that aren't really shown in here, but I mean, there is a conversion area for all of your enums, your extended data types, the number sequences. There's some things with inventory dimensions where you can remap those. GL, the chart of accounts, a little different now. So the concept of virtual companies that exists in 2009 and 2012 goes away in D365. So data that's shared between multiple companies in those previous versions needs to be migrated over a little differently. So there's some, I'll say mapping tools or some helpful pieces of this data migration tool that address those areas. You can break the loads into different chunks by module or legal entity or however else you feel. So you don't have to do a whole company at once. You don't have to do all of your AP at once. You can do just vendors first and bring those over. What else did I want to share on this? It's pretty granular. It's pretty intensive to go through and check what you want and what you don't want. So it'll certainly require the help of a partner that knows the data models and the connected areas. But it is a good way to minimize what you bring over as well if you're trying to somewhat start fresh. So we have had clients that have said, you know what, I'm going to leave all my historical data over in my old system. Let me just bring over the master data and the opening balances. almost like I'm going to be doing a new implementation and kind of start fresh. And this tool allows for that pretty easily. Okay, so for 2012, I'm going to shift over a little bit. Again, either of those topics that I'm hitting, if there's anything you're looking for more detail on, at any time I can reach out to our developers that have done these. We can go through a proof of concept together or expand on a topic. Trying to cover a lot in an hour, so we'll keep going forward on the 2012 path. 2012 is going to be a little different, as I mentioned. There's already some really good tools in LCS that can help you to upgrade the code, to analyze your customizations and tell you which methods are available in D365 or if something's been deprecated. And I'll show you some screenshots of that in a moment. The big thing, though, on the data upgrade, again, this is really more around code. Let me see if I'm missing anything here. Prep test. So there's the checklists that you have almost when you're doing a new install. There's an upgrade checklist you'll go through. It'll walk you through it a little bit more. The data upgrade, though, is what I really want to cover because it's a little bit different. With the data upgrade, you'll actually take the entire 2012 database, upgrade it, so you'll back it up, you'll upload it to some Azure storage, which again is going to be a separate machine. You'll have to pay the cost for a moment, at least temporarily. It's not one of the machines that's going to be provided. It should be cheap though. Azure storage is pretty inexpensive, even for gigs of database. But the idea though is that you'll upload it somewhere and then you'll go into a dev environment of D365 and you'll choose to restore that. And it will then kick off and execute some of the data upgrade tools that it has. Now there's a set of kind of fallout expectations that will be in here. There's different pieces of data that are that have changed a little bit. So the starting point really should be a 2012 R3 database. So I didn't mention that, but if you're on 2012 prior to R3, the recommendation is to basically do the in-place upgrade to R3, which will get the data models to match. And then you can take that R3 database and upload it as your starting point for D365. The steps involved, which I'll show here. Okay, so this is a couple of the different diagnostics reports you can get. I'm not sure how much I want to share on this, but let's see if I can pick out a couple of things. So there's things that it's checking, like, oh, you have a number sequence that is not continuous, or there's some blocked process in the SQL database. So it's going to look at, again, in the database for problems that you should not move forward with. So this is your upgrade analyzer tool, and then there's a way to resolve each of these, and you can mark them as resolved, and then the next time it would not spit those out. There's similarly tools for looking at what's been deprecated. So in this one, I had alerts, for example, and this is a slide from about 3 months ago because alerts is now back into D365, but it's still a good example. At the time we were doing this one, alerts, the functionality of letting you know when data changes and notifying folks, was not in the original version of D365. So this upgrade analyzer tool was able to say, hey, you have alerts configured in your 2012 environment. This has been deprecated and it's not going to work in D365. So that's the type of code and even functionality review that these upgrade analyzer tools and system diagnostics tools will provide you as you're doing the pre-upgrade checklist. Here's another just picture of that checklist. So you're talking about it walks you through the process. You go through these different things. It'll tell you, yep, we've got these things checked off. We've done them correctly. Helps you to convert the code to the new format, with meaning the extensions versus layering. Now it'll tell you when there's code conflicts, which I'll show you a fun picture of that in a second. But this is where I mentioned the majority of your efforts are going to be resolving these code conflicts and refactoring code into the D365 version of it. There are certain portions of the D365 system that are still not available to to customize. It's called an entity. I'll try to get some more information on this if anybody's looking for it. But this is the one area where Microsoft has said, yes, we need everybody to upgrade and get their code redone. But if you're trying to use functionality that we are still working on exposing in different ways, there's a little bit of a grace period with how long you can keep your code in the layered model if it's related to certain pieces of data entities. I think by the time, if anybody's just now starting with an upgrade project, by the time you get done, that will be no longer a thing. I think they're targeting, as I mentioned earlier, this whole idea of having continuous updates in place. One of the prerequisites for that is that they need to make sure that they fully deprecate this layering model, which means they need to fully make everything available to use in the new model. So my personal thought is in the next couple of weeks even, most of those entities will be released. I know that I saw something that basically was asking partners recently, hey, if you're still aware of anything you can't do in this new extension model, let us know, because they want to be able to say that it's fully ready for that. So going into this is an example of the code conflicts that could come out. And then what we've done is we've said, all right, as part of our estimating process, if there's 24 elements that need to be turned into an extension and we need to upgrade, change these other metadata, there's a handful of different types of, whether it's a table or a report, types of, we just call it the root type, but the type of element basically that's in your AOT today, and if it needs to be addressed or not is what it comes down to. So certain data types may be evolving. There could be a table that has new fields or a different type. So this is the guts of the code migration. Doesn't sound fun. It's not probably very fun right now for our developers, but going back to what we talked about with planning earlier on, if there are opportunities to reduce your customizations, use more standard functionality, use a rapid approach, that would alleviate these type of tasks, which are the manual code upgrades. This is just another picture showing that pre-upgrade checklist. I'm not going to go into that too much. We talked about this as well, the concept of extensions versus layering, the idea of packages. So at the end of the day, you can still have collections of code in different ways. It's just now it's a model instead of a layer, and there's just a little bit of learning there for anybody technical that's interested in that. Then when you actually go and start writing new code, the concept, it's called branching. So that's, instead of merging code all the time, you create these extensions and branches so that you can keep upgrading the core code and not break your customizations. That's what it all comes down to. And it's why going forward, it will be flexible, but to get there, it requires rewriting the code, one time in a new model. Again, this is getting pretty technical. There's the concept of a run book you have to use to kick off some of these steps. There's some troubleshooting things that I was going to share here. That's things that we've come across that we can share more of from a technical stance. I think I'll skim through this though, because I wanted to hit on a few more points. Again, if you're starting to do this yourself, and you run into any of these things, and you're interested in the exact technical steps or some of the common things that are no longer recognized that we have to address, I can certainly get you in touch with one of our developers to talk through it further. All right, so kind of finishing up, we have a couple more steps. If you remember, there was the deployment and operation steps. Deployment, what I want to talk about here is basically don't wait until the end to start thinking about your testing. And this goes with a new implementation or an upgrade, but the data validation is going to be pretty extensive, and we can spit out reports pretty quickly that show you the number of records and that they match, and that some of the balances from your reports match in the before and after. But you still need to have a process in place for how you want to validate this yourself. The other process that I see missed sometimes is the cutover itself and how to handle, let's say, your open AP. If you have invoices that have been produced but not paid yet or not received, and how you're going to handle that. So we definitely make this part of our process to talk through those cutover concerns, how you'll track things out of the system if you have to, how you'll be able to tell people that, yeah, we might not be able to do a three-way match because there's not a receipt yet, but you know, those, whatever the concerns are when you're doing your cutovers is what we'd talk through. I talked about this a little bit. So the general process is that you're going to be able to run the reports from both systems, and your data should match, and you'll be able to do row counts and things like that for number of records, and spot checking obviously to make sure that the data is looking correct. At the final step, as I mentioned, you'll do your reviews on what we call a gold environment. You'll validate it, and then that will get moved up to become your production database. Is the process with Microsoft before you're live. Signs your project is headed for failure. So if you're already in the middle of this, this could be a whole nother presentation, to be honest, but there are a few things that we've seen where people have called us and said, yeah, we started our own upgrade, we're doing it ourselves, but we think we need a little bit of help. And that little bit of help turned into starting over. So these are a couple of things, just, if you are seeing these type of comments being made that, oh yeah, this will be easy. It'll be, everything's in green. We're on track. Everything's looking good. It's, we've got all these different phases lined up. It's going to just go smoothly. If you're seeing decisions getting rehashed over and over that weren't necessarily thought through, or that's the kind of the number one point that you lost that love and feeling. There's a lot to it. So so you need to have these plans in place. There's a strategy around how you decide what to go forward with, and that's and then your ongoing support as well. So on that topic, briefly, the ongoing support, as I mentioned, this is a little different beast now because you need to be working with a partner that is familiar with more than just the AX itself. So there's the Azure pieces, there's the infrastructure management, there's some of those other opportunities to use the BI tools, to use the predictive analysis and some other cool things there around the data AI that Microsoft is really pushing right now. So at Merit, we've called it Merit Care over the years. It's our ongoing support branch of the company, US-based support analysts and technical resources that have had to do a lot of learning in the last year, like our consultants as well, because we're trying to make sure everyone knows about all the different pieces of the puzzle. So if you are using the CRM and sales or talent now, we need folks that can not only implement that for you, but support it. So we've already had the Azure infrastructure piece in place for a while. We've been doing that, like I mentioned, and we've been ramping up as well on the IoT, the Power BI, the machine learning. So we really are trying to put together now relationships with our clients that are, not just keep the lights on and support, but every month, hey, what else can we do? Well, here's what's new. How can we use this to keep extending your return on your investment? And that's indicated here. We have a process at Merit where we ask for support, or we ask for feedback from our clients every quarter on a scale of 1 to 5, and we take that seriously. Everybody at our company has that as a piece of their compensation puzzle even. So it's a pretty deep investment to our clients' satisfaction that we include with our ongoing support practice. I'll skip through that a little bit. Again, just a little bit more about our team. Last thing I wanted to finish with, and this is still a little bit of a work in process, but I wanted to bring it up. And again, at our UG Summit booth in a couple of weeks, we'll have all this information for everybody. I mentioned that Microsoft is pushing now that there are these different assessments that are available. There's a 3, a 5, a 10-day assessment for an upgrade, and they are providing some vouchers to work with a partner to determine what that would look like for your organization. So a lot of things we talked about, a lot of those analysis tools that I showed, we can help walk you through that. we can go through the demo of the system. We can go through some of the functionality and learn with you if it makes sense to start fresh or to upgrade. You know, there are some prerequisites to this. We need to make sure you have the right folks committed to work with us. This is a joint effort, but what we end up doing is we go through both functional and technical. This one I'm showing here was a 2-day assessment, but we depending on the complexity of your environment and the amount of time that we feel is needed, we usually are now doing this 3, 5, or 10 days, these assessments. But again, we'll go through kind of the, you know, what's your system really used for? What are the goals of the system? So some kind of functional background information. We'll make sure we understand which modules and outputs processes are in scope. We'll talk about things like compliance and if there's auditing that's needed, data retention. So again, that could impact how you decide to migrate the data, if you need to bring over everything or if you're able to keep certain data in your old system, for example. On the, you know, technical side, I didn't necessarily put all that in there, but same thing. We'll go through a lot of those tools. We'll work to determine those estimates, which really, as I mentioned before, that the estimates, the biggest factor is how much custom code you need to move forward with. So this is all the different pieces of our assessment that we would be offering. At the end of the day, the deliverables then, we give you that infrastructure approach and data migration strategy. We talk about that functional analysis. So the biggest part of our assessment process is going through functionality and learning with you. Is your, you know, custom module you've built necessary anymore? What's the closest thing to it in D365? Can we use that and change processes a little bit to standardize it? We'll talk about the other integrations of the third-party tools. So it's really learning all the different pieces of the puzzle we talked about earlier on, so that we can confidently, you know, put a plan forward with you guys. All right, I think kind of final advice, as I mentioned before, if you're already tackling this, if you're getting ready to tackle it, it's not a simple project. Something will come up that you didn't expect, but it's definitely worth it. This is the most excited I've been about a Microsoft product in however many years we've been working with GP, AX, different versions. There's a lot of cool things that are coming even further down the road, but most of them are in some form already there, with being able to, you know, tap into some of the data analysis and predictive thinking. It's going to be a fun next couple of years with Microsoft to see how this keeps evolving, but I know it's on the top of the radar for, you know, across all projects at Microsoft these days. So you know, Satya Nadella is doing demos where he's in CRM talking about case management and the predictive nature of what their clients are asking for. It's not something you used to see every, you know, even a few years back with Microsoft. So I think I'll maybe end on that. If there's any other questions, Josh, we have a couple minutes maybe, if anything has come through.
I didn't see any questions yet.
Okay. I did have a couple references I'll include in here too. There's a few documents that I referred to, some screenshots, so this will be included in the slide deck for everybody. And I think beyond that, thank you for your time today, and have a good day, everybody.